Hello, 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 and welcome to another edition of VU Sports Wired. Cutler Klein here alongside Max Schneider and Drew Sundaram. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. We have got a fantastic show for you this evening, bringing you all the latest in Commodore Football, and it's our official Vanderbilt basketball preview show. Both the men's and women's team tip off this Friday night at Memorial Gym. We've got all the insight and analysis into both the men's and women's teams. But first, it is still football season, whether you like it or not. And we're bringing you the highlights from Vanderbilt taking on Western Kentucky this past Saturday. Let's roll. Vanderbilt and WKU coming to you from Vanderbilt Stadium. Vanderbilt in desperate need of a win. There's Coach Mason rocking his signature vest. First quarter here, Kyle Schirmer with the time finds Trent Sherfield in the back of the end zone for the 7-0 lead. Sherfield's been a reliable target for Schirmer all year. Good for Vanderbilt to get on the board early, but here come the Hilltoppers. On a little trick play here, pass goes into Carius Fant backwards, and he's going to fire it all the way down for Quinton Baker for the touchdown for the Tops. A little strategery, some trickery from Western Kentucky there to tie it up. Still in the first quarter here. There goes Ralph Webb saying, "Get off me," over the goal line for the touchdown, and the Commodores up on top, 14-7. Hilltoppers right back at it, though, late in the second quarter. Mike White on the keeper into the end zone for the touchdown. Commodores got to White a lot in this game, but he was able to get to them there over the line to tie it up. But Vanderbilt had one more trick up their sleeve. Kyle Schirmer from around midfield going deep over the middle for Pierce. It kicked off of a Western Kentucky foot and into the outstretched hands of Trey Ellis. His first touchdown as a Commodore could not have come at a luckier time. 21-14 Vanderbilt at half. Third quarter here on the end around. It's Trent Sherfield making a man miss down the sideline. Touchdown Commodores, and that would be pretty much all they need in this one. You see what happens when you diversify the run game. You get plays like that. Final score from Vanderbilt, 31-17. Vanderbilt within 2 wins of bowl eligibility with just 3 games remaining in the season. A big win for the Commodores. Western Kentucky is not the same Western Kentucky team that we've seen in previous years, obviously. They're a bit of a weaker team, but still, a win is a win for the Commodores, and they certainly looked a lot better, not even just by comparison to Western Kentucky. Where did Vanderbilt really improve in this game, in your minds?
I mean, both sides of the ball, everywhere, run game, pass game. This was a big step up from where they've been in recent weeks, and mostly because what we've talked about. They hadn't been able to control the line of scrimmage. They did that excellently this game on both sides of the ball. First, on offense, Ralph Webb was able to eclipse 100 yards for just the second time all season. That used to be something that we expected from him week after week. This week, finally able to get it done against, albeit a weaker Western Kentucky defense, but to be able to get that push up front, to get Ralph Webb over 100 yards and diversify that run game, like you said. 45-yard run to Trent Sherfield, 18-yard run to a tight end in Sam Dobbs. Just a few of those trick plays, pulling out some tricks, and being able to get that run game going allowed them to control the line of scrimmage more. And then even better on the defensive side of the ball, this Vanderbilt defense is a team that's given up more than 500 yards on the ground in games this season against Alabama. They come out here and hold Western Kentucky to -6. That's an improvement that you don't even expect to see over an entire season, let alone a few weeks. So for them to come out and perform as well as they did against Western Kentucky's rushing offense is really a testament to how much they've improved in recent weeks, no matter who the opponent.
Right, when I think about Vanderbilt's improvement in this game, I want to talk about the offensive line, but specifically I want to talk about the actual pocket. I want to talk about Kyle Schirmer's pocket presence and the way that he's been moving. Because what I saw from this game was incredibly impressive on Kyle Schirmer's part. And the offensive line did hold up a lot better than they have in previous games, but Western Kentucky was rushing only 3-4 players a lot of the time. And what that meant is that there were a lot of players that were playing coverage. And often when you look at how quarterbacks handled the situation, it can be frustrating because they try to force passes, they get impatient. But what we saw from Kyle Schirmer was that he was using his legs, he was rolling out, he was extending the play, he was making really smart decisions in the pocket. And when someone did get through, he was doing really, really good moves, really impressive moves with shoulder fakes and really small moves to avoid these defenders and avoid these pass rushers that bought him time and allowed him to make really smart plays and really smart decisions. So I think that his pocket presence is something that might be underrated in this game, but it's something that we really need to consider. And looking at the defensive side of the ball, I think a really cool stat is that Vanderbilt was 8 for 21 on Western Kentucky third down plays. So Western Kentucky only converted 8 of 21 third down plays. And I think that's really important because that means that this Vanderbilt defense is playing really good football when it counts. And that means that they're getting Western Kentucky into unmanageable third down situations and they're getting off the field. And I think that's huge for Vanderbilt.
Coming up this week, they take on Kentucky. We mentioned before, 3 games remaining, 2 wins to bowl eligibility. Last year, we were talking about the APR. Can they sneak in with 5 wins? This year, based on the math, with how many teams are at 5 or 6+ wins right now, it seems like that's not going to really be an option to get in with 5 wins. How big is this game this weekend against Kentucky so that they can avoid the same thing they had last year where they had 2 games left and needed to get 2 to get to bowl eligibility?
This game's huge, and in part because it involves them kind of keeping up what they've started with that run defense. I mean, Kentucky is a rushing offense by any stretch, and they have Benny Snell, who's one of the best running backs in the SEC. And so not just in terms of wins and losses, but Vanderbilt needs to continue to do what they've been doing to be able to stop that ground game. And when you look at the bowl picture going forward, you don't want to have to go into Tennessee that last week needing a win. Granted, Tennessee's not the best football team, but you don't want to have to get that win on the road. You'd love to be at 5-5 after this week and just need one more. 4-6, I mean, they did it last year, but that's not the recipe to get into a bowl game going 4-6 and having 2 must-win games at the end of the season. I mean, Missouri's a good football team. They're actually playing extremely well right now. They just demolished Florida. So you don't want to have to go into Missouri and then travel to Knoxville to try to get those 2 wins. This game against Kentucky is huge, and it's a must-win for Vanderbilt.
Right. I think this game is really huge, but I think it's really important from how does Vanderbilt want to end the season type of way. Because when you're looking at how we talked about Vanderbilt last season, we talked about the polls, we talked about how they just got into this bowl game, and we were looking a lot about the mentality of the team. And this game against Western Kentucky, they just snapped that 5-game losing streak. That's really not hanging over their head too much anymore. So I think that this is a really good opportunity to just go into Kentucky, try and continue the momentum they've built from this Western Kentucky win, and just try to play some really good football, get some momentum going towards the end of the year. Hopefully that last game isn't a must-win game, and to get into a bowl game feeling good about themselves.
As fun as a bowl-off between Derek Mason and Butch Jones in the final game of the season would be, I feel like it would definitely be a lot more comfortable if they got in off that. You mentioned the run defense here. Western Kentucky's rushing offense is not great. Then again, there were some not great rushing offenses that Vanderbilt couldn't stop against teams like Ole Miss and South Carolina. How important is it for them to just continue that success and to keep that up and to make Kentucky's offense one-dimensional? Because, I mean, Stephen Johnson at quarterback's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but Benny Snell is one of the top backs in the SEC right now. How much do you think they're going to put emphasis on just making sure that they can just shut him down, make this offense one-dimensional, and make Johnson beat them through the air?
I mean, I think that's the entire point of emphasis this week, and I'm sure that that's what Vanderbilt's going over in practices leading up to this game. Make this offense one-dimensional. Because Benny Snell's not the only guy that can run the ball, and Vanderbilt has had a lot of trouble in recent weeks with quarterbacks using their legs, and that's something that Stephen Johnson does well. I mean, you saw it with Jesse Ertz, ran for 126 yards against this team. You saw it with Jalen Hurts the week after. Quarterbacks have been able to gain yardage on the ground against Vanderbilt, and so it's not only about stopping Benny Snell, it's about keeping Stephen Johnson in the pocket. And I think that has to be kind of the game plan going into this week. Control the line of scrimmage, make Stephen Johnson beat you through the air, because that hasn't been something that he's been able to do much this year. So like they did this week, Mike White threw for 324 yards. That's okay because the offense was only able to put up 17 points because they were so one-dimensional. So it's not so much about the numbers. Make this a passing offense, and Vanderbilt can win this game.
Right, I think that's a really interesting point when you're talking about containing the quarterback's mobility, because when you look at the -6 number from this game, -24 of those yards came from sacking the quarterback. And I think that's really interesting because they really have the pass rush going. But that can also be a blessing and a curse, because all of a sudden if they have this really good game rushing the passer, they can almost get too overeager, and I'm really worried about them not being able to set the edge because they're too gung-ho trying to get after the quarterback. So I think that discipline on that edge is going to be a huge point of emphasis this week.
We'll see how Vanderbilt's fates turn this week as they take on the Kentucky Wildcats. 3 p.m. at Vanderbilt Stadium. Please, please, please come out and support the Commodores. It should be a fun game, and it's the last home game before Thanksgiving break, so if you're not sticking around for that Mizzou game, definitely come out and support your Doors. From the gridiron, we go to the hardwood. Vanderbilt basketball is back, indeed. And Vanderbilt's taking on Austin Peay on the men's side on Friday evening. We'll get to the women in just a second, but first I want to talk about this men's team. An NCAA tournament team last year fell in a heartbreaker to Northwestern. This is a team that is missing some of their key players from last year, like Luke Cornett, but they have a lot of young talent or a lot of players that could really make a difference. We'll start here with your X factor for this Vanderbilt team this year, whether that's a player or a group of players. What's your X factor for the Commodores?
Right, so my X factor is going to be a group of players, and I'm going to be looking heavily towards that senior leadership, especially when you lose a player like Luke Cornett, especially when you end the season the way they did last season. I think this senior leadership is going to be huge, determining the mentality of this team and how they're going to play these basketball games going forward. I mean, you're looking at Riley LaChance, you're looking at Matthew Fisher-Davis, you're looking at Jeff Roberson, a lot of these guys who spent last year finding their roles on the team, and now they're going to have to be those guys that everyone else looks to, those guys that are going to have to be given week in and week out so that a lot of these younger players can develop and they can help these younger players find their roles in this team. So I think this senior leadership, this group of 3 players, is going to have to be a real constant for this team, and that's what I want to see them develop into.
Yeah, I'm going to go with one guy, and it's a guy who we've really seen a lot of growth from the past 2 years, and that's Joe Toye. Didn't even hear his name for his entire freshman year until the last couple games of the season where he really shined. Then last year, in a starting role, averaged only 6 a game, but we saw some real flashes out of him. He had some great games. This year now, coming into his junior year, understands the system, will most likely be starting for this team. He's really the only true small forward on this team. And he's a guy that can do it all. He can shoot the 3, he can get inside. He has so much athleticism, and if he can showcase that this year, then this team can be great. Because a lot of the problem with this offense has been a lot of standing around, kind of passing the ball until a few seconds left on the shot clock, and then forcing up a contested 3. And when the offense really stalls like that, it would be great to have someone who can create their own shot off the dribble, especially someone with the size of Joe Toye. And Toye's shown the ability to do that in recent years, but hasn't been able to do it enough, kind of. And this year, I think, if he's able to be the kind of guy who can score off the dribble, get inside, still shoot the 3 well, and play good defense as he's always done, he can really be the X factor that pushes this team forward.
Interesting to see how those guys turn out. Next, we're looking to the player that you're looking for the most improvement out of. You saw a lot of players show a lot of growth last year. There are certain players that are probably going to need to step up even more with some players left in their voids. Who is the player that needs to improve the most for you guys?
So when I'm looking at the player that I really want to improve, I'm looking at Matthew Fisher-Davis, and I'm specifically looking at Matthew Fisher-Davis from a turnover standpoint. Because let's be honest, Vanderbilt's never going to be that team that out-physicals that of their opponent. They're going to have to be the team that plays smarter. And so often last year, we saw untimely turnovers. We saw lots of really easy points that were scored on the fast break because of turnovers. And when you look at Matthew Fisher-Davis' stats for the season, you see that it's 52 turnovers to 35 assists. And he's a guy that's handling the ball a lot. He's a guy that, yes, creates his own shot and is going to have turnovers when you're trying to do that much with the ball. But when you're turning the ball over that much, I think that's a real problem. So I'm going to be looking at Matthew Fisher-Davis to decrease his turnovers.
Yeah, I'm going to look to a guy who played a little bit in the post last year, and that's Jerry Baptiste. I mean, of course, the biggest loss for this team is Luke Cornett. Kind of an irreplaceable loss, the way he was able to score from anywhere on the floor at that height. I mean, led the NCAA in most threes all time by a player 7 feet or taller. But now he's gone, and the only veteran presence that can really play center and play that down low position is Jerry Baptiste. And Jerry Baptiste has kind of been an enigma for this team. He's struggled with foul trouble every time he's kind of gone in the game, therefore hasn't been able to play too many minutes and get that much experience under his belt. And now he's being thrust in this starter role, and frankly, we don't know if he's ready for that role yet. So he's the X factor, and he doesn't need to be the guy on offense. Jerry Baptiste is never going to be the guy who averages double-digit points or is a scoring machine. But he can be that guy on defense who is a legitimate rim protector who can make teams feel like they have to shoot the ball to win games. And if he can learn to slide his feet, be mobile, because he has an athletic body and he is athletic, if he can force guys to not force themselves into the paint, to be able to protect the rim, then this team can be a lot better than they already are.
I agree with you on Baptiste. He's one of those guys last year. He seemed kind of clunky in some way. He's got the physical build. He's got some of the intangibles, but he just needs to kind of smooth out those rough edges. I think he could be a huge presence that he's going to need to be, unless you're going to have someone like Ejike Obina, freshman, coming in there and making a huge impact. Last topic on this matter, though, we're going to look at the season prediction for this Vanderbilt team. What are you thinking in terms of, not necessarily the exact record, but where do you see this Vanderbilt team ending up at the end of the season, just based on the roster and the preseason predictions?
Right. So Vanderbilt went dancing last season, and I think that this is pretty much going to be the expectation for a lot of players on the team, a lot of students around campus. That's going to be what a lot of people hope to see out of this team. But when you look at Vanderbilt last year, they were 10-8 in the SEC, and the SEC is noticeably tougher this year. And when you look at Vanderbilt's overall record, they had that pair of wins against Florida, which really stood out, really helped them make their case for the tournament. So when I'm looking at Vanderbilt's teams in terms of whether or not they're going to make it to the tournament or not, I think that not only are they going to have a very similar record to their in-conference record last year, I think they have to have those marquee wins like they did against Florida.
Yeah, I'm going to say that Vanderbilt's going to be a bubble team this year. And I think that last year they were able to just escape the bubble. 2 years ago they're on the bubble, and I think they're going to be back there this year. And the reason I say that is because Vanderbilt doesn't need that many wins relative to the rest of the country to be a bubble team. And kudos to David Williams, because he really stacks the schedule every single year, and he's done it again this year. Early on, they have a game against USC, one of the premier college basketball teams in the nation this year. Then they have that series in the Barclays against Virginia, and likely either Seton Hall or Rhode Island after that. And then the SEC is extremely difficult this year. I mean, when you look at all this depth and talent in the SEC, Kentucky and Florida, kind of the usual suspects. Then you have Michael Porter going to Missouri, Colin Sexton going to Alabama. You have that front court of Texas A&M. And then teams like South Carolina coming off a Final Four run, Arkansas. I mean, the list goes on and on. The SEC really is as strong as it's ever been. So when you look at Vanderbilt, they have such a high strength of schedule yet again that even not reaching 20 wins can still get them onto the bubble, and I see them there again. They've always been the kind of team that plays to their opponent and can beat some of these tough teams.
You mentioned Mizzou there as one of those teams that just got a huge boon in recruiting and is going to be a force to be reckoned with in the SEC. I mean, Vanderbilt could be on the edge of that right now, depending on what happens with Simi Chateau and Darius Garland, so it'll be interesting to see about that. Vanderbilt basketball tips off this Friday at 8:30 p.m. Central at Memorial Gym, taking on the Governors of Austin Peay. Come out and check that one out. But first, before you do that, come out early at 6 p.m. to check out the Vanderbilt women's team taking on Middle Tennessee State. Kicking off the second season under head coach Stephanie White. We're asked the same questions here about the women's team. Who's your X factor for this women's basketball team?
My X factor is really the post play that this team has. I mean, with the loss of Marquess Webb, obviously a lot to make up. Stephanie White spoke about her kind of this morning, saying she's one of the greatest leaders that she's ever been around, and that includes her time with Team USA basketball and in the WNBA. So that kind of leader is really irreplaceable. And when you look at the post now, you have the kind of people that can replace them. Kayla Overbeck was excellent last year, averaged upwards of 9 points a game, really came into her own late in the season. And this team has a lot of height that it didn't have last year. So the X factor is really them being able to use that height and kind of shift from that run-and-gun offense a little bit to be able to get the ball inside and score in the post. Because if they can diversify that offense and be able to score inside and out, then they can definitely improve over last year.
Right. When I'm thinking about X factor for this team, I'm not thinking about a specific player. I'm thinking about head coach Stephanie White. And something I want to focus on is October 30th. Because when they had their first preseason game, there was the national anthem protest. And I don't want to get too into the politics of this, but it's a very tricky situation for a head coach to manage, to figure out the motivations of the players and balance different ambitions and different desires. And I think that head coach Stephanie White did this really, really well. And after that, we found out that their motto for the season is going to be as one. And it's really going to be a focus on playing together as a team, together as a unit. You see a lot of players are becoming upperclassmen. They're going to become leaders in this team. There's a lot of new freshmen that head coach White has to manage. So I think that her leadership style managing this team is going to be my X factor for how well they do.
Certainly interesting. White is a fearless leader of this team right now. She's been absolutely outstanding, really a big presence in the community here, and that's something that people are looking for from the Vanderbilt women's basketball program for a long, long time. Fellas, same question again. If you had to pick the player to improve this season, who would you take?
I mean, I'm going to continue to talk about the post and Kayla Overbeck. I mean, and Kayla Overbeck, I don't say this in the way that I say Jerry Baptiste needs to improve to become a rim protector. Kayla Overbeck is that rim protector, and she's a force to be reckoned with. But she needs to improve and become the best player on this team. And she fully has the capability to do that. And this team will go as far as she goes. I mean, we saw the past few years with Marquess Webb able to score inside. That's kind of been the recipe for this team Overbeck kind of took that place over last year, even eclipsed Marquez Webb in scoring, and has really been excellent for this team all throughout practice, all throughout the fall, was excellent for them last year. To continue that growth and improvement, she can really be one of the best post players in the SEC. So if she can grow into that player, then Vanderbilt has a real chance kind of riding on her this year.
Right, when I look at players who I want to improve, I'm actually going to take a look at Rachel Bess. And when you think about Rachel Bess, you think about the fact that she was the leading scorer for the team last year. But when I want her to improve in is her assists per game, because last season she averaged about an assist and a half per game based on her stats. But I think it'd be really interesting if she kind of took on the same transition that James Harden for the Houston Rockets took on. This leading scorer, really good shooting percentage, but if we saw her become more of a distributor, because she's the third or fourth best assister on the team right now, if she took on more of that distribution role, I think that could open up a lot of different scoring channels, and I think that's something that she could thrive at.
Vanderbilt hasn't made the NCAA tournament in women's basketball in a few years now, second year under Stephanie White. I'll ask you guys for your season prediction. Do you think that they could at least compete for an NCAA tournament spot? Do you think they'll be a bubble team this year, much like possibly think that Vanderbilt men's basketball is going to be as well?
Yes, I think this team actually can compete for a tournament this year. And it's because, I mean, I've spoken about the loss of Marquez Webb, but that's really the only big loss for this team. And anytime you're talking about a team that returns their top 4 scorers, that team stands a chance to get much better. And that's what the case is for this basketball team this year. When you return your top 4 scorers, whether that be Krista Reed, who's an excellent three-point shooter, she's one of the best shooters in the conference, or Kayla Overbeck, who can score inside, this team has such versatility, it has depth, they're young, and they can score the basketball and they can get out and run. So this is a team that was around 500 last year with minimal loss and a lot of freshmen and sophomores coming in fresh and ready to play. This team can compete for a tournament spot.
Right, I think without a doubt they're going to be able to compete. And I want to take a look at their SEC record last year, because yes, they were 4-12 in the SEC, and they did have that pretty rough 9-game losing streak. But when you take a look at their losses in the SEC, a lot of those losses were incredibly close. I think 4 or 5 of them were within 1 or 2 possessions. And when you get the vibes of this team and you look at the way they're progressing, they're not going to have that same type of 9-game losing streak. So I think progress is inevitable, and I think it's really exciting to see what this team is going to be able to do.
2 second-year head coaches for Vanderbilt basketball this year. Come out and support the Commodores this Friday, 6 p.m. for the women, 8:30 p.m. for the men. Should be a fun evening and a fun weekend of Commodore sports overall. But also, if you're looking at Commodore sports on Friday, I want to give a quick shout-out to the Vanderbilt women's soccer team playing their first NCAA tournament game since 2006 up in Columbus, Ohio on Friday afternoon at 5 p.m. Central. Good luck to Darren Ambrose and his squad there. With that, that'll just about do it for this week's episode of VU Sports Wired. For Max Schneider and Drew Sundaram, I'm Cutler Klein, saying so long, and we'll see you next time.